Today, we're going to be talking to our boss of
Yeah.
enforcement. Or maybe it's better to call him the enforcement boss. That might be even better. But he's what makes us legitimate as a company when it comes to parking. He gives us credentials and street cred.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Marcus, I'd love it if you just kick this off with a little bit of your backstory, like what you've done
Yeah.
so far in your career and maybe some personal stuff, and then what you're doing now with our company, Luminous.
My name's Marques Oliver. My career in security began circa 2000. I joined the United States Army, did a tour in Iraq. After that was done, I went to college and finished up there and ended up finding a job out in Las Vegas. And I worked at an exotic car dealership.
Okay.
And I was the head of security for that dealership. And it was a really cool experience. I just used the fundamentals of security stuff I learned in the Army. But the owner of that company happened to own one of the largest private security companies in Las Vegas at that time. And I had worked there for some time, and he had asked me to come over to his security company as a director and learn the ropes there in the industry there. A lot of our clients, I'd say 70 to 80% were residential communities in the Las Vegas Valley, and just like everywhere else, parking. So that was my first real introduction to what parking enforcement was, who did it, why they did it, all the problems that are associated with that. And this is probably circa 2005, 2006. So we didn't have any cool tools such as Parking Boss or really anything. Everything was tracked with pad and paper between a patrolman and a dispatcher. You learn how it works at a very basic level, which is great for me now, right? Now that we have all these algorithms and cool programs and ALPR, really understanding where the core of that comes from is extremely helpful. But yeah, I dealt with a lot of HOA. I've gone to more board meetings than I care to admit to. So from there, I moved to Southern California and joined another very large private security company at the director level. And their wheelhouse was parking enforcement.
Okay.
And they had actually gone to the extent of hiring a developer and building out their own system. This was before I joined this company. I think it was the largest in Southern California at the time. It was very big, maybe 20, 30 patrol routes, 30 vehicles going out every night. But they had taken things to the next level and developed their own software for parking management and enforcement. Was it great? No, but it was functional and it worked. It cut down on the errors. It brought some level of comfort to the communities that these things were being tracked better. Tow companies weren't just hooking up vehicles and going rogue. Patrol company was actually capable of managing different enforcement thresholds and counting how many days a guest vehicle's been there. So I learned a ton about that process and really introducing that type of technology to multifamily and HOAs. California is huge for parking, second only by Florida in my experience. So that was really valuable. I just learned so much from that experience. Moving forward from there, I formed my own private security company, and just every other security company in that market, parking was a staple. You just had to do it. Even if you were hired to monitor the activity at a pool, you were doing parking enforcement. I knew from my past experiences I was not using pad and paper. I knew I did not have enough money to develop my own. So I went on a hunt looking for the best thing that was out there. You want to take a guess who that was?
I have no idea.
I tell you, your job depends on it. So I found this really cool company called Parking Boss. It was beautiful. It felt like they were with me along this parking enforcement journey that I never expected to ever end up on, by the way. But they had all these lessons and experiences that if I were to develop a program, they had already done it. So I was sold. So I rang up Joel and Nathan. I even flew to Washington to meet with them because I couldn't believe it. I was like, this, you guys are like the unique.
And,
You've cracked the code.
and to be clear, Joel and Nathan are the founders of Parking Boss.
Yep. So that's where I got acquainted with Parking Boss, and it was really fun at that time introducing it to a market that has never seen anything like it. It just made things so much easier on everyone's front, from the residents to the clients to the property managers to the guards to the dispatchers to even the tow companies. Everyone was just happy to use it. It's fun to use, and I just really enjoyed it. Fast forward a few years, I got out of that business, and I could only think of one thing I wanted to do, and that was join the Parking Boss team. And that is the cliff notes of the past 18, 19 years of my life.
Thanks for sharing. I didn't know the whole story either. The part that I find interesting is how the joining happened. What was that? Where you contacted them and it was like, hey, I want to work with you guys?
More or less. You have to imagine I'd been working alongside of them for a couple of years at that point. Just setting up accounts and bouncing new ideas off each other. And so the relationship was already well formed. But as I was getting out of that business, it just so happened that my wife is from Snohomish, which is where Parking Boss was based. And I said, hey, I'm getting out of this business and going to be growing my family down the street from your office. I'd love to be a part of that team. And we made it happen.
Well, that's convenient. That's crazy. Yeah. That connection was there. That's fun. So now it's been how long? You've been with us?
Oh, going on 4 years.
Okay, 4 years. Yeah, and for everybody, Parking Boss came out of another company, which we are called Luminous, and we formed back in, I think, 97. Then the Parking Boss program, that was created back in 2011 and really took on a life of its own and took over the whole company back in 2015, 16. So, and then you joined soon after that, I would assume.
Yeah, I want to say 2018.
Okay. Yeah. It was a side project, this Parking Boss thing, and it became a lot more. So, yeah. And it's been great because we've been able to grow healthy and add key pieces like Mark. We aren't subject to outside investors and things like that. So we are able to grow in a healthy way, in a thoughtful way, and make changes to our platform that makes sense for both the patrol and tow companies, but also the apartment companies and end users like guests and residents and all that. So we put a lot of thought into it, and they get a lot of feedback from our customers. But Marcus, you've been great for us to think through a lot of the challenges of the people that are going to use it, especially enforcement people.
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily to toot my own horn, but I think it was
toot it. You're a boss.
Brilliant of Nathan and Joel to bring me in just because of those unique experiences. And oftentimes the vendors who use systems like this, like the tow companies and the patrol companies, they don't usually have a voice in how those systems are created. And they're just like, here, we built this and you're going to use it, go for it. So it is a bit of an honor for me to be on board the Parking Boss team. For one, just because of what it is, but for two, I do advocate for the enforcement side of the business. The more efficient we can make things, the better it is for patrol out in the field. It really doesn't matter what you're doing on a community. Making parking enforcement efficient and accurate is really important because that allows those guys to focus more time and energy on, I won't say things that matter, but things that matter, life and safety. The less time I can spend on parking, the more time I can spend on trespassers, noise complaints, vagrant, things of that nature. And it's hard to quantify the value of it, but the time saved is invaluable in my eyes.
Yeah, for sure. What's one of the things that we're starting to use as a company from a technology standpoint not necessarily our IP, but like integrations and things like that, that you think are going to be really helpful for us when it comes to working with enforcement and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think the dream, the pie in the sky, has always been automatic license plate readers, ALPR for short. And that is historically been obtaining for the patrol industry because it's so expensive to get those cameras, to get a system to house that information to read and whatnot. You're talking $25,000 to $30,000 per vehicle to do that. Parking Boss has managed to do it by harnessing power in your cell phone and bring that forward. That's almost no cost. And I think that has been tremendous, very helpful for patrol. Something I think for the first 2 years we dreamt about, and then it started to take shape, and now we have it. And many of our clients are using it, and it's just huge. So the next level of that is vehicle mounted cameras. I think when I started, the cost of doing that, 20, 30,000. Right now, we're hovering around 5, and it's getting lower. And I say within the next 12 months, we're going to be able to bring that forward at a reasonable cost, if not free in some instances. And why is that important? Again, the efficiencies. Okay, so the less time I'm spending on parking, the more time I can spend somewhere else, the less cost it's going to be to our property managers and to those communities who have to pay for those services. So if it's going to take me 5 minutes to do a job that historically takes me 30 to 45 minutes, for me, that means I can spend less time on your property and do more properties. For you, I'm on the property less time, so my invoice is going to be lower.
Yeah, and it also like changes the game on, do we need permits or not? If you have an enforcement company that's rolling through with a camera, you don't necessarily you don't even necessarily need permits, because you're just, as long as they're doing their job, they're catching those that don't belong.
Yeah, and we're getting there. We are getting there, especially on the permits. Now, don't get me wrong, permits are good, quick visual reference for the human. As you stated, for a camera, they're obsolete. But for a human, hey, does that vehicle belong here? Right away, a red sticker will tell you yes or no. So I think in some places, some communities, some properties, you still need that, because there will be a level of self-enforcement, self-policing, where everybody has eyes on the property. And so a neighbor can look out a window and say, hey, that vehicle doesn't belong here, it doesn't have a sticker.
Oh, and that might be even more so for like HOAs and condos, where you maybe you don't have enforcement, you just are self-enforcing strictly, which is pretty common. But apartments, it's the other side. They tend to have patrol and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. On-site staff as well.
Yeah, but for everybody, there is a benefit to having permits, but the nice thing about our permits is that they're unique to a degree. We create them. They have a QR code. You can scan it and get information. I'm sure you've run into a lot of problems with permits that are just bought off the internet that can be reproduced.
Oh yeah, and then back in the day, that was like the thing, man. There's a black market for permits, and in California at least, there was guys who were selling little hologram stickers, the little security stickers to slap on them. And I took joy in busting them, because some of those were really good fakes, and you got to take a magnifying glass to really catch them. So yeah, it does. Our digital QR permits definitely addresses those. I personally do like, because they're simple. They're not huge. They're not taking up massive real estate on your windshield. They don't give away too much information. It doesn't tell you where that. If I'm going to the mall and you see that sticker on my car, you don't know where I live. You don't have a clue.
Yeah,
so
I've always found it interesting when people have permits and it says the apartment community on the permit.
It's huge.
Telegraphing to the world where someone lives.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, you want to stay away from that stuff.
Yeah. And did you ever have any stories where that, maybe you don't, but where that actually ended up, you saw people using those permits and it ended up being an issue, like somebody actually followed somebody or Anything like that?
You know what? I don't have a story at the tip of my brain, but I'm almost positive I've ran into some level of that at some point in my career.
So the moral of the story is don't do that.
No, do not. Be as indescript as you can. Yeah, and same with school campuses. A lot of colleges, especially community colleges, for some odd reason, love to broadcast their name and
Right.
what parking lot that vehicle is assigned to. And if I'm a bad guy looking to do bad things, I know this person's going there and he's going to be in class for X amount of time and I can do whatever I need to do. Yeah, I definitely want to stay away from those things if you can.
Yeah. Don't be more information that's not a benefit to a parking pass. Yeah. Being able to like scan it with the right software and get that information, but only the right people, because even our QR codes, some random person on the street scans it, they're not getting really anything. But if they have our software, then they are. So
I think that's really, Parking Boss is the first company I've seen roll that out. And that was pretty genius, where members of the public can scan a plate. And like you said, the information they're getting is really just the information in front of them, right? It's the license plate that should be on that car. It's the permit number that should be on that car. And maybe there's an assigned space where that car should be parked. All things that you should be able to get just by physically looking at that car, but it just validates that they're in compliance. And again,
which I guess even on site at a community, if the resident scanned it and they found that it didn't match the license plate, then that resident could be helpful. They're like, hey, I think this person's frauding.
Yeah. I mean, you've heard the term, it takes a village.
Yeah.
And that's how security is in enforcement and those type of things. Everybody has a role in it. You can hire the National Guard, but if you're not locking your doors at night, if you're leaving your wallet on top of your car, there's only so much that can be done. So everybody has a job to do.
Yeah.
Parking where you should be parked, keeping eyes out for suspicious activity. Why is there a vehicle parked here with spider webs all over the wheels, no permit in a resident space? Those are things that just call management about. You don't actually have to do anything but bring it up to someone who can.
Right. Do you have any tips for people about implementing something well, where there's a good cohesion between enforcement, apartments, residents? And is there certain things that you found are best to do, best practices, whether it's signage or whatever it is, that really...
Oh, you put me on the spot. You're putting me on the spot.
You got so much in that noggin anymore.
It's really hard to give a one size fits all, because all communities are different depending on the region and everything else. I would say the number one thing to do is have a sit down with your team, everyone who's involved in that process. So if you're an HOA, you're a condo association, have a parking committee, have a sit down with the parking committee, with your patrol team, with the tow vendor, everyone who's a player in that process. Have a meeting. Doesn't have to be every board meeting, maybe once a quarter, maybe once a year, but have a sit down and make sure we're all on the same page. Review your rules. Do they make sense? Do they make sense now? Do they make sense tomorrow? Do they make sense at Christmas? If not, when do you change them? How do you change them? And who are you changing them for? I like to be fair. Some communities are zero tolerance, and that could be from experiences they've had in the past. I believe humans make mistakes at least once. And with that in mind, your parking program should allow for one warning, at least. People who are going to break the rules are going to continue to break the rules. It's not going to be a freebie for them. And it's usually a small percentage of the community that is causing a higher percentage of your problems.
Yeah.
My colleagues and I always say the police deal with 1% of the population 99% of the time. And that can skew your perception. Same with parking enforcement. You're going to have people who make mistakes, but generally your bad apples they're just bad apples. And you want to make sure that is really who you are targeting and structuring your enforcement program for. And there is a difference between your enforcement program and your parking program, which is for the residents, visitors.
And there's no way, like before you had Parking Boss or another program, there's literally no way to do that and keep tabs on people and like easily see, hey, this person's parked here 5 times illegally, or they're an unauthorized vehicle. Unless you have Parking Boss or something, like literally, how could you do it? Unless you're writing it on a piece of paper.
There is a way. It can be done, but it's full of errors. Okay, it's prone to mistakes because the people you're asking to do this are doing this at midnight, at 1 o'clock in the morning, right, with 100 other things floating through their brain. Their last property, they may have had to break up a domestic dispute or something. You don't know where their head's at. And then what ends up happening is the wrong person gets a violation. The wrong person gets towed. And the next morning, the property manager gets fussed out. The tow company becomes upset because this person's banging on their door. And
yeah.
So, there you can do it. You don't want to do it that way. You definitely want to have a system such as Parking Boss that
with our system, you have a paper trail, and even to a degree, pictures a lot of times, comments, all there say this guy is saying it wasn't him, but it was him. Yes.
Oh, I really enjoy that too, because again, it's usually the bad apples who want to put up a huge fight. It's so fun to just go into the management side of Parking Boss, and you can see how many times, you can see when a person tried to register and use a fake license plate and was rejected. You can see how many times they tried to change a character and a password trying to crack it. There's just so much things that you can see to catch those guys, and then once they do get towed, you can forward all of that information to them. And often to their attorney they have who needs that information.
Everybody has an attorney.
Everyone has one, right? Everyone has one, especially those who don't have parking permits.
Right. You're going to hear from my attorney. I'm sure I will.
Yes. Yeah. Make sure he registers his car too, please.
No, that's great. So I'm going to put you on the spot again. Do you have any, I just really am curious. There's got to be something that sticks out. Are there any funny parking related or otherwise stories from your history that just always, like...
Man, there's nothing funny about parking problems at midnight. Let's see, what do we have? Most of the ones that are funny are inappropriate.
Okay, you can censor it a little bit.
Let's just say there's unregistered vehicles are usually a good, cheap motel. Guess I would frame it that way.
Okay.
Lots of coming up on vehicles parked in communities with people who couldn't afford a motel.
Got it.
And yeah, we'll put that there.
I think that's clear.
I'm sure I do, man. You got to give me a heads up when you need those, because I have some I share, and I'm sure after this I'll be like, oh, I should have told him about that one.
In the future, we'll think through that, and we'll get those just as sound bites so that we can share them. I'm sure that'd be fun.
I'll just forward you those stories and you publish them. Parking Boss.
But yeah.
Parking Boss tales.
I've lived in apartments, and there's things that I recall that is just like, just you're like, that really happened.
There's some crazy stuff that goes on.
Yeah. Is there anything else from a parking enforcement standpoint that you wanted to, I guess, like maybe some tips, like bullets?
I think the one thing I always like to hit home with is you have a lot of companies like the ones I used to work for that have developed a parking management system. And it's not going to be anywhere as nice as what we do, because what we do is all that we do. These companies, their order of business is patrol, security, and they happen to have built a parking system. So it's not going to be the best. It may be functional. The problem with that is, beyond it not being the best, what happens when that vendor's service starts to falter? And I've seen it time and time again where property managers just don't want to change vendors because they have to redo their whole parking program. And so now they're locked into terrible service with a mediocre parking software. So it's really important to own your parking system, like Parking Boss or whoever you want to use. Own it. And that way you can pick and choose who you want to do your enforcement. And if they go out of business, if their service falters, you can change them and plug someone else in. That'll be my first tip, because I see that a lot. And by the time they come to us, they've pulled their hair out bald. So avoid that frustration. Just do it.
Yeah.
Secondly, I would say make your rules firm but fair. Okay, we don't have to just start towing and ticketing and booting everything right off the bat. Understand that people are going to make mistakes. Give them a warning. Okay, that warning, like I said, these people are going to break rules. They're going to break rules. Yeah. That warning is just a freebie to them. They're going to do it again. Make them firm but fair and give it time to work. It's not going to happen the first week. It's not going to happen the first month. 60, 90 days is when we start seeing that community behavior start to take shape. And keep your parking program flexible. Like I said earlier, what works today may not be the best program for you in the fall. It may not be the best for holiday seasons. So make sure you have something that if you need to make changes, you can do so quickly. And then lastly, communicate with your residents, what your program is, what the repercussions are for not following those rules, how to contact who they need to contact when they need to. Include your patrol team or whoever's doing your enforcement in those conversations. Ask them what works for them as well. Because you can say, hey, I need you to patrol my 1,000-acre property with 1,000 parking spots 3 times a night, and a company just can't do that. You've essentially set them up for failure. So have those conversations of what is actually possible, what makes sense, what can we do together. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll say the last tip is to call me, email me, moliver@parkingboss. I'm happy to have a conversation with whomever to help you build and strategize an enforcement program for your community.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's why we're so happy to have you, because probably there are a lot of other options when it comes to parking softwares. There's more and more popping up. We're very well aware of it. But we're every day trying to make our software better. And one of those things is taking feedback from our customers and also leaning on our partnerships with patrol companies and things.
Absolutely.
Which Marques is able to speak to them on in their language with experience to really hone it in. And we never say perfect. We're betterists, Marques.
Yep.
We're always trying to make our product better. So we really appreciate feedback from people for sure.
Yep.
The one other thing I wanted to say and point out is our software is only as good as you enforce. So if you have no enforcement, there's really no point. It might work to a degree because you have stickers out there and things like that, and maybe hopefully everybody will just abide by rules. But if you don't actually enact the rules,
what I like to say to that is I often tell clients a parking program without enforcement is a speed limit without fear of a speeding ticket. Yeah, people are going to follow whatever the speed limit is, but eventually everyone's going to be speeding, right?
Yeah.
So you definitely need some level of enforcement. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go out and spend thousands of dollars on a patrol contract or whatever. You can put together a self-enforcement strategy that costs you $0. But as you stated, you definitely need some level of enforcement.
Yep. Yeah. It's like we see who's successful even using our software, who's really got a good system in place. They're using our software to its fullest and also have either a self-enforcement or a good partner, and they're just enacting everything, the rules, everybody's on the same page, communication, like you said. is all super. If anybody ever needs anything, just give us a shout. Thanks for joining me and Marcus on the 5th installment of Boss Talks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Boss Talks podcast. If you would like to be a guest on the show, please reach out via email at info@communityboss.com. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to like, share, and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can also watch the podcast live every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the Community Boss LinkedIn or Facebook pages. Until next time, manage like a boss.